An old man in Harlem had been mailing a birthday card every 7th of October for 9 years, to an apartment he had never lived in, to a girl he had never met. He paid for the stamp himself and walked the 4 blocks to the blue box on West 144th, because at 71 his knees were bad, but his promises were not. The young woman who finally knocked on Amos Carter's door did not know her dying mother had written her one last time. Amos knew. For 9 years he had kept that one card, the green one, wrapped in a dish towel that used to be his wife's, because it was the only thing left in the world that proved a woman had loved her daughter enough to say goodbye. He had run out of easy ways to give it to her. The morning she finally knocked, he had run out of time, too. But to understand the card, you have to understand the man. And to understand the man, you have to go back, way back, before any of it, to a boy on a porch in Orangeburg, South Carolina, learning what it means to carry something for somebody else. Amos Carter was born in 1954, the 4th of 6 children, in a house his grandfather built with lumber he hauled on his own back. His people had come up out of the cotton country the way half of Harlem came up, on a train with a cardboard suitcase, a sack of fried chicken and biscuits, because the dining cars wouldn't serve them. His mother used to say it like a prayer when she was tired. We came up from the South with nothing but our names and our manners, and we kept both. Amos was 9 when the family settled into a 3rd-floor walk-up on West 144th Street, and he would live within 6 blocks of that building for the rest of his life. He learned the neighborhood the way other boys learned scripture. He knew which stoops had ladies who'd give you a nickel for sweeping, which corner store ran a tab, which church basement on Sunday had the sweet potato pie that was worth getting your shoes shined for. He went to work for the post office in 1976, when he was 22, and he stayed for 38 years. He was a letter carrier, a walker. Not a driver, not a clerk behind the counter, a man on foot with a leather satchel and a route he could have walked blind. 11.5 miles a day, 6 days a week, in a city that did not slow down for weather. He wore through a pair of postal issue shoes about every 14 months, and he saved the old ones in a milk crate in the closet, soles worn down to the cloth, because his mother had taught him you don't throw away a thing that carried you that far. People who have never carried mail do not understand what a route is. They think it's bags and boxes. It isn't. A route is people. After enough years, a carrier knows a street the way a doctor knows a body. Amos knew that the lady in 3B got her sister's letters from Charleston on the 2nd and the 16th, and that on the months the letters didn't come, she would be standing in the lobby asking. Not asking really, just standing there, and he learned to say, "I'll keep an eye out," Miss Pearl, in a voice that meant something. He knew which mailboxes meant a man had lost his job, because the envelopes turned from bills to bigger bills, to the kind with red printing on them, and then to nothing, which was worse. He knew the apartment where the Social Security check came, for 2 years after the old man inside had died, until somebody finally noticed. He knew the new mothers by the diaper service flyers, and the church by the bulletins, and the boy going off to the army by the recruiting mail, and 3 months later the same boy's letters coming home with a return address that was a base in Georgia. And he, Amos, would hand those to the mother personally, would put them in her hand and not in the box, because some mail you do not leave to a slot. That was the thing his supervisors never put in the manual and never paid him for. Presents. Amos believed, the way some men believe in God and some believe in money, that the job was not to deliver mail. The job was to show up, to be the one steady thing on a street where almost nothing was steady. You don't have to be important. His father used to say, sitting on the porch with a cigarette he wasn't supposed to have, you just have to be the man who comes back. His father had been a Pullman porter for the railroad, gone 3 weeks out of every 4, and he said it like a man who knew the cost of the other kind. Amos took it into his bones. For 38 years he was the man who came back. He married Corinne Davis in the spring of 1979 in the basement of Mount Calvary Baptist, where she sang second soprano, and he sat in the back, pretending he had come for the sermon. She was a school aide. She wore her hair pressed during the week and wrapped in a satin scarf at night. And the first time he saw her without it, the silks sliding off and her hair loose, he understood he was going to spend the rest of his life. They had one child, a girl. They named her Della after Corinne's grandmother, and she came into the world on a Tuesday in February of 1983, with a heart that the doctors heard the trouble in before she was 3 days old. A hole, they said, a defect in the wall between two chambers. There were words Amos learned that winter that he never wanted to know, words he could still spell at 71 because he had stared at the discharge papers under the kitchen light so many nights. Ventricular, cyanosis. The way Della's lips would go a little blue when she cried too hard, and how Corinne learned to hold her so she wouldn't. They were going to fix it. There was a surgery when she was bigger, when her body was stronger. And so they waited, and they kept her warm, and Amos worked overtime. He didn't tell Corinne about to put money in a coffee can on top of the refrigerator, marked Della in his own block letters. She lived 8 years. She lived 8 good years, is the thing people who didn't know her got wrong. She was not a sick child who happened to laugh. She was a laughing child who happened to be sick. She drew. Lord, that girl drew. She drew on the back of every envelope Amos brought home, on the inside of cereal boxes, on the brown paper from the butcher, and what she drew almost always was birds. Not careful birds. Fast ones, scribbled in motion, as if the only thing worth catching about a bird was that it was leaving. She gave them to him every morning before his route. Here, Daddy, she'd say, take this one so you got company. And he would fold the drawing into the breast pocket of his uniform, over his heart, 11.5 miles, and bring it home soft at the corners. She was going to turn 9 on the 8th of February. The surgery was scheduled for the spring. She did not make it to either. She died in the night, in January of 1992, 3 weeks short of her birthday, of an infection her tired heart could not fight. And the last full conversation Amos had with his daughter was about whether birds get cold. He had told her, no, baby, God gave them their coats already. He had not told her happy birthday. He had been saving it. He had a card for her, a real one, store-bought, with a cardinal on the front because she loved the red ones, and inside he had been planning what to write, and he had wanted it to be perfect, so he had waited. He waited 3 weeks too long. He kept that card his whole life, blank inside. The cardinal on the front faded over the decades to a kind of rust. He never wrote in it because there was no longer anyone to write to, and because writing in it would have meant admitting it was over, and a man can refuse that for a long time if he is stubborn enough, and Amos was stubborn enough. Corinne grieved out loud, the way her family did, with food and singing and the whole congregation in the apartment for a week. Amos grieved the way his people from Orangeburg did, which was to say, he did not where anyone could see, and that difference grew between him and Corinne like a slow crack in a wall, and in 1997 she went to stay with her sister in Maryland, and the staying became permanent, gently, without lawyers, 2 people who still loved each other and could not be in the same rooms as the same ghost. She passed in 2009. He drove down for the service and sat in the back of a church he didn't know and came home, and after that the apartment on West 144th held no one but Amos Carter and a blank card with a faded bird on it, and a milk crate of worn-out shoes and 38 years of being the man who came back to a street that had mostly moved away. He retired in 2014, 60 years old, a pension that came on the 1st of the month, knees that the union doctor said had about 4 good years left in them, which turned out to be optimistic. He thought retirement would be rest. It was not rest. It was the absence of the root, and the root had been the thing that made him show up. And without somewhere to show up to, Amos found himself sitting in a kitchen at 6 in the morning, fully dressed with nowhere on earth that needed him. He took to walking his old route anyway, slower now, with no bag, nodding at the few faces left that knew him. Mr. Amos, the barber on the corner, would call out, "You off the clock and still working the street," and Amos would lift his hand and keep walking, because the truth was too plain to say out loud. He didn't know how to be a man who doesn't come back. Now you know the man. Now we can talk about the card. Renee Tillman was 7 years old in the autumn of 2015, and she lived with her mother in apartment 3B of the Walk-Up at 412 West 144th Street, which is to say she lived 2 doors down from Amos Carter had grown up in a building he had delivered to for the better part of 4 decades. Though by 2015 he was a year retired, and the route belonged to a younger man named Devin, who drove a truck for the parts of it that the rules now allowed. Renee's mother was named Vernita Boyd, and Vernita was dying, and almost no one knew. She was 34. She had a kind of cancer that started in the blood, and the doctors had given her a number once, a percentage, the way they do, and then they had stopped giving her numbers, which is its own kind of number. Vernita had come to Harlem from a small town outside Augusta when she was 19, with the same cardboard suitcase grit her landlord's grandparents had carried, and she had built a life out of double shifts. She cleaned offices downtown at night, the same marble lobbies and the same wastebaskets, and she did hair on Saturdays out of the kitchen of 3B to make the rent, and she raised Renee alone, because Renee's father had been a sweet, useless man who left for a job in Atlanta when the baby was 2 and sent $40 now and then until the now and then stopped. She did not complain about much. She had a saying she'd gotten from her own grandmother, and she said it to Renee at the kitchen table on the nights the bills were laid out like a hand of cards nobody wanted to play. "We don't have a lot, baby, but we have enough, and enough is its own kind of rich." When the diagnosis came, Vernita made a decision that the people who loved her argued with for the rest of their lives. She decided not to tell Renee, not the whole of it. The child was 7. Vernita's own mother had died of something slow and frightening when Vernita was a girl, and Vernita remembered the smell of the sick room and the way the grown-ups whispered and the long ugly waiting, and she had decided, lying in a hospital bed downtown with a needle in her arm, that her daughter would not spend her childhood in a waiting room. So she did not tell her. She told her she was sleeps. She told her the medicine made her sleepy. She kept doing hair as long as her hands would let her, sitting down now between clients, and she kept Renee in school and in her good shoes and in church on Sundays, and she spent down the small savings she had on a winter coat 2 sizes too big so it would still fit the girl in 3 years, on a pair of boots the same way, on a library card and a dictionary, and a globe from the thrift store on Amsterdam. All the things she was buying for a future she already knew she would not be standing in. And in the September of 2015, knowing the autumn would likely be her last, Vernita Boyd did the most ordinary and most extraordinary thing a mother can do. She bought a birthday card. Renee's birthday was the 7th of October. Vernita bought the card 3 weeks early, from the same drugstore on the corner of West 144th, where everyone on that block bought everything, and she chose it carefully, standing at the rack for a long time while her body told her to sit down. It was green, not a little girl pink, not a cartoon. A deep forest green with a single bird embossed on the front in gold, a bird in flight, and Vernita chose it because Renee at 7 had announced that she was finished with pink and that her favorite color was now green like the leaves before they fall. And a mother remembers a thing like that. Inside, the card was blank, and Vernita took it home, and she sat at the kitchen table where she did hair and where she laid out the bills. And she began to write to her daughter the things a mother writes when she knows she will not be there to say them. She wrote about being 7 and about being 17 and about being 34. She wrote what enough means. She got most of the way down the inside of the card, in her round, careful hand, the hand that signed Renee's report cards and her permission slips, and she addressed the envelope, and she put a stamp on it. Why she mailed it instead of simply giving it to the girl, no one ever fully knew. There were guesses, later. Maybe she wanted Renee to have something arrive, something with her name on it in her mother's writing, after. Maybe she meant to mail it close to the day so it would come like a surprise. Maybe a woman that sick and that tired makes a small strange decision, and there is no further meaning in it than that she was a person, doing her best, running out of time. What is known is this. On the last day of September 2015, Vernita Boyd walked downstairs holding the wall, and she dropped a green envelope addressed to her own daughter at her own address into the blue mailbox on the corner of West 144th and Frederick Douglass Boulevard. And then she went back upstairs, and she got much sicker, much faster than even she had planned for, and within the week she was in the hospital downtown and not coming home. And Renee was taken in the middle of a school day to stay with Vernita's sister, an aunt named Sandra, who lived all the way out in Far Rockaway and whom Renee barely knew. The apartment at 412 West 144th was given up. There was no money for 2 rents and a hospital. And Sandra, who was doing the best a frightened sister can do with no warning, packed what she could carry of a 7-year-old's life into 3 garbage bags and a suitcase in a single grieving afternoon. And what did not fit was left behind, and the management changed those locks within the month. Vernita Boyd died downtown on the 19th of October, 12 days after a birthday her daughter spent in a stranger's apartment in Far Rockaway, not understanding yet that she was now a person without a mother, and the green envelope, dropped in the blue box on the last day of September, entered the United States mail. Here is where it is worth slowing down, because here is where the machinery of the thing matters. And Amos Carter spent 38 years inside that machinery, and it is the reason this story goes at all. A piece of first-class mail is a small sealed promise between 2 strangers and the government. You give them 60-some cents and your trust, and they swear to carry your words to the address you wrote, and almost always they do, by the millions, every single day, with a reliability so total that people curse the post office for the 1 letter in 10,000 that goes wrong. But things do go wrong. People move, buildings change hands, and the system has rules for that. Careful old rules built up over a century and a half. When a letter cannot be delivered as addressed, the first thing the carrier looks for is forwarding. If the family filed a change of address, the post office will forward first-class mail to the new address for 12 months. No charge, and then for a while longer for a fee, and that is the safety net that catches most of it. But Vernita had not filed a change of address because Vernita had not moved. Vernita had died, and Sandra, out in Far Rockaway, drowning, had not thought, in the worst week of her life, to go to a post office and file a yellow card forwarding the mail of a dead woman and a missing child from an apartment that no longer belonged to either of them. Why would she? So the green envelope arrived back at 412 West 144th in the first week of October, in the hands of the young carrier Devon, and the apartment was already empty, the name on the buzzer already pried off, and there was no forwarding order on file, which left the letter what the post office calls undeliverable as addressed, and an undeliverable letter with no good forwarding and no usable return address that anyone will answer, has exactly one destination left in the entire system. It goes to the Mail Recovery Center. There is one of these in the country. It is in Atlanta, Georgia. For most of its history, it had a grimmer and more honest name, the Dead Letter Office, and that is still what the old carriers call it, the place where letters go to die. Trained clerks there open the unopenable, hunting for any clue inside that might reunite a letter with a person, and when they cannot find one, after a holding period, the mail is destroyed or, if it has value, auctioned. Millions of pieces a year. A green card with a bird on it and a dying woman's handwriting inside, and no living forwarding address would have gone to Atlanta, and been opened by a stranger in a warehouse, and read for clues, and finding only a dead woman's address and a child the system had lost track of, would have been, in the gentle bureaucratic language of the manual, dispositioned, burned. The last words Vernita Boyd ever wrote to her daughter would have ended their existence in an incinerator in Georgia, and no one alive would ever have known they had been written. That is what was supposed to happen. That is the rule, and the rule is not cruel. The rule is just the rule, the system doing, the only thing a system can do with a promise it has no way to keep. It did not happen because of a man walking a route he was no longer paid to walk. It was a Saturday morning in the second week of October 2015. Amos Carter, 1 year retired, 61 years old, was doing what he did most mornings, which was walking the old route in the cold, with no bag and no reason, nodding at the barber, buying a single hard roll at the court hard rolls from since the Ford administration. Devin, the young carrier, was a good kid, respectful, called him Mr. Carter and meant it. And Devin was working the boxes in the lobby of 412 when Amos came past, and the two men did the thing carriers do, the half-minute of shop talk that is really just two people acknowledging they belong to the same strange church. And Devin, sorting a fistful of misdelivers and undeliverables into the loop for return, held up a green envelope and shook his head the particular way carriers shake their heads at the mail that has nowhere to go. "Lady in 3B, Devin said. "Boyd, whole family up and gone, no forward, and look, it's her own handwriting. Sent it to her own self, to the kid, I guess. Going to recovery," he said, recovery the way you'd say morgue. Amos Carter took the green envelope out of the young man's hand. He would never afterward be able to explain to himself why. He turned it over. He saw the name. He saw the gold bird in flight, the same color his daughter went looking for, the same kind of bird Della scribbled on the back of his envelopes so he'd have company on the route. He saw a child's name, Renee, in a grown woman's careful hand, and a birthday, October 7th, that had already passed, 11 days gone. And Amos, who had a card of his own in a closet, 4 blocks away, that he had never been able to write in because he had run out of time, stood on the sidewalk on West 144th Street and did not give the envelope back. He stood there for a long time. Devin, not understanding, asked if he was all right. Amos did not answer right away. He stood perfectly still on the sidewalk for the better part of a minute. An old black man in a gray coat holding a green envelope, the cold coming up off the pavement and the gospel leaking out of somebody's open window 2 floors up. And what Amos Carter was doing in that minute was the oldest arithmetic he knew. He was weighing a rule he had served for 38 years against a thing the rule could not see. The rule said this letter belonged to the system, and the system would do the only thing it could, which was end it. And Amos knew, the way you know the weight of your own grief, that somewhere in this city, or out of it, there was a little girl who did not yet understand that she had nothing of her mother's handwriting, nothing in her mother's voice, and that this green card was the one thing that could ever fix that, and that if it went to Atlanta, it was gone forever. "I'll see it gets where it's going," Amos said. That was a lie, and he knew it was a lie, and he committed it anyway. A carrier does not keep mail. It is the first rule, and the last rule. It is a federal trust. Men have gone to prison for far less than walking off a sidewalk, with a sealed first-class letter that is not theirs. Amos Carter had never in 38 years held back so much as a postcard. And he put the green envelope inside his coat, over his heart, the way he used to fold his daughter's birds, and he carried it the 4 blocks home, and that small theft, that one broken rule in a lifetime of keeping them, became the truest thing he ever did. He did not open it that day. He set it on the kitchen table, and he looked at it and across the room, while his coffee went cold, and the bird on the front looked back. He knew that the right thing, the legal thing, was to take it to the station and surrender it, or to find this child and this family and put it in their hands. He spent the better part of a week trying to do the second thing the honest way. He still knew people. He asked. He found out, in pieces, the shape of it. He found out about Vernita from Miss Pearl's niece, who'd had her hair done in that kitchen. He found out the woman had passed downtown. He found out there was a daughter and that an aunt had come and taken her, but no one on the block had the aunt's name, or had it wrong, or had it as a borough. And nothing more. Somewhere out in Queens, the Rockaways maybe, and the trail ended there in the way trails ended. For poor families who moved in the dark of their worst weeks and left no forwarding card, because forwarding cards are for people who have time to file them. So Amos Carter was left holding a dead woman's last letter to a living child he could not find. And here a different man might have given up, or given it over, or let it go to Atlanta after all, and told himself he had tried. Amos did not, and the reason he did not is the reason this whole story turns, and it is sitting in a closet 4 blocks away with a faded cardinal on the front. Amos knew what it was to have words for your child and no way left to deliver them. He had carried that exact weight for 23 years. And he was not going to let it happen to a stranger if there was any breath in his body that could stop it. He could not find the girl. But he knew, the way a carrier knows things, one fact he could build on. Sometimes people come back. Children grow up and they go looking for where they came from. They stand in front of old buildings. They ask the super. They ask the corner store. They leave their number with somebody. If Renee Boyd ever came home to West 144th Street looking for her mother, the trail would lead her to that apartment, to that block, to that mailbox. And so Amos Carter, retired letter carrier, made a delivery plan for a letter that had no living forwarding address. And the plan was the strangest and most patient route of his life. He would keep the original, the green card, the actual handwriting. He would protect because that was the irreplaceable thing, and if it got lost or wet or stolen, there was no second copy in all the world. He wrapped it in one of Corinne's old dish towels and set it in the basket in the front closet beside the blank cardinal card, 2 letters that could not be delivered, keeping each other company. But every year, on the 7th of October, on the girl's birthday, Amos Carter's would sit at his kitchen table and write out a new card by hand. Not a copy of the words. He never felt those were his to copy, but a card of his own, plain, addressed to Renee Boyd, at 4-12 West 144th Street, apartment 3B, the address she had last been a child at. A card that said in his own careful block hand, the same kind of hand that had once filled out a coffee can marked Della, that there was a letter waiting for her, that someone was holding something of her mother's, that if she ever came back to this address, she should ask, and it would be given to her. He never signed his name. He signed it a friend of your mother's, which was the only lie left in it, because he had never met Vernita Boyd, but he figured a woman who would mail her dying love to her own daughter's door would not mind a stranger calling himself her friend. He walked the 4 blocks himself, slower each year, and every 7th of October he dropped a card into the same blue box on the same corner where Vernita had dropped hers, addressed to a child who no longer lived there, into the apartment of strangers, and he walked home, and he did not know if a single one of them would ever be read by anybody. And he did it anyway, because his father had told him on a porch in another century that you don't have to be important. You just have to be the man who comes back. The strangers in 3B by then were a woman named Loretta Greaves and her grown son. The first card in 2016 Loretta Greaves nearly threw away. Junk, she figured, some old church mailing for a tenant long gone. But it was handwritten, and it said someone was holding something of a dead woman's for a lost child. And Loretta Greaves had buried a sister herself, and could not bring herself to put a thing like that in the trash. So she set it on the shelf by the door, and the next October another one came, and the next. By the 3rd year she was watching for it. By the 5th she had a rubber band around them, and a feeling she could not name, that she was a stop on a route, that she was holding a door open in the dark for someone who had not yet come, and might never, but for whom the door had stayed open all the same. 3 blocks apart, for 9 years, two strangers kept a promise to a third stranger they had both outlived. Amos mailing into the dark, Loretta catching what came, and out in the world a girl named Renee was growing up and becoming a young woman and deciding, the way some children of the sick decide, that she would spend her life in the rooms most people are afraid to walk into. And not once in all that time did she know that on the 7th of October every single year, somewhere in the city she was born in, an old man she had never met was buying a stamp. Renee Tillman was 16 years old in the autumn the 9th card was mailed. A senior at a public high school in Far Rockaway, and she was about to become the first person in her family to go anywhere near a college. She had been raised since she was 7 by her Aunt Sandra Tillman, her mother's older sister, who had married a city bus mechanic named Clarence and taken Renee in the worst week of both their lives, and never once made the girl feel like a burden, though money had been tight every single day of the 18 years Sandra had been alive to count it. Renee carried her aunt's last name now, Tillman. Most days she barely remembered she had ever been a boy. That was the wound, though Renee would not have used that word. She remembered almost nothing of her mother. She was 7 when Vernita died, old enough that there should have been 100 memories, and young enough that there were maybe 9. The smell of pressing oil and a hot comb on a Saturday. A green coat, a song hummed low in a kitchen, a voice she could no longer hear no matter how hard she pressed her hands over her own ears at night and tried. There were 2 photographs. In one, Vernita was laughing at something off to the side, and you could not see her whole face. In the other, she was holding a baby that was Renee. In front of a building Renee did not recognize, and on the back, in pencil, in a hand Renee had memorized the shape of without being able to read the heart of it. It said us, summer. That was all the handwriting of her mother's that existed in the world, as far as Renee knew. Us, summer, 9 letters. She had traced them so many times the pencil had gone shiny. People who lose a parent young will tell you the cruelty is not the missing, it is the not knowing what you are missing. Renee did not grieve a mother. She grieved a shape, a hole in the exact form of a person she could not assemble. Her aunt told her stories, and Renee was grateful for them. But they were Sandra's stories, Sandra's mother, told in Sandra's voice. There was nothing that came straight from Vernita to Renee, nothing addressed to her, nothing that said your name in your mother's hand, and a child decides things quietly in the absence of evidences. The thing Renee had decided, somewhere around the age of 11, and never said out loud to a living soul, was that her mother had not had time to leave her anything, that she had been an afterthought of a dying woman with too much to do. It was not true. But it is the kind of thing a child will build in the dark, brick by brick, and live inside. It was a Sunday in late October, 2 weeks past Renee's birthday, when the question finally came up out of her. Sandra was at the stove. They had been to church that morning, the small storefront congregation. Sandra had joined out in the Rockaways, and the apartment smelled of greens and the cornbread Sandra made in a cast-iron pan that had been their grandmother's, brought up from Augusta 60 years before. Renee was at the table with the acceptance packet from the nursing program spread out in front of her. The one she had gotten into, the one that started the next fall, the reason her whole future suddenly had edges to it. And looking at that future, a girl will sometimes turn and look at the past, because you cannot tell how far you have come without knowing the place you started. "Auntie," Renee said, "I want to see where we lived. Me and Mama. The old place." Sandra Tillman set down her spoon. She did not turn around right away. When she did, her face had a thing on it Renee had never seen, and at 16 Renee did not yet have the name for it, though she would learn it later, in the work she was about to spend her life doing. It was the face of a person who has been carrying something heavy for so long that being asked to set it down is its own kind of fear. "I have to tell you something," Sandra said, and she sat down at the table and she put her hand flat on the acceptance packet as if to hold the future still for a minute. "I was 22 when your mama passed." 22, baby. Younger than the doctors you're about to go learn from. And I did everything wrong. I want you to know that before you go out into the world thinking grown people know what they're doing. I did the best I knew, and the best I knew was not enough. She told her then, the parts Renee had never heard. How fast it happened at the end. How she had 3 days to empty an apartment a whole life had been built in. How she had been so frightened of the rent and the lights and a child's college someday that she had thrown away things she would give 10 years off her own life to have back now. A box of cassette tapes. A church fan with Vernita's writing on the handle. And the mail, Sandra said, and here her voice went somewhere. Renee had never heard it go. I never filed the card at the post office to send the mail on. I didn't even think of it. Whatever came for your mama after, bills, letters, whatever, it just went back into the dark and I never knew and I never chased it. I think about that. I think about it more than almost anything. Some letter could have come, baby, and I let it go nowhere. Renee did not interrupt. She had learned already, without knowing she was learning it, the thing she would build a career on. She did not fix it. She did not tell her aunt she had done fine. She just reached across the grandmother's cornbread and held the hand that was flat on her acceptance packet. And she let her aunt be 16 years old and afraid in the body of a 40-year-old woman, and the two of them sat there a long time while the greens went soft on the stove. The next Saturday, Sandra drove her into the city, to West 144th Street, to find a building neither of them had stood in front of in 9 years. The block had changed and had not. The corner store was a different corner store. The drug store on the end was gone, a bank now, the kind with no people in it. But the buildings were the buildings, the same brownstone faces, the same stoops, and on a stoop 2 doors down, a barber was sweeping the sidewalk in front of his shop, the way barbers have swept that sidewalk on that block for 70 years. Number 412 still said 412 in chipped gold paint over the door. Renee stood in front of it and waited to feel her mother, and felt, instead, the strange grief of a place that does not remember you. The building did not care that she had been carried through that door. Buildings don't. She went up. Sandra waited in the car because some doors a person has to knock on alone. 3rd floor, the stairs smelled of somebody's good cooking and somebody's bleach, and on the door of 3B, Renee Tillman, 16 years old, raised her hand and knocked on the apartment she had last lived in as a child who still had a mother. The woman who answered was in her 60s, in a Sunday house dress though it was Saturday. With reading glasses pushed up into hair wrapped under a satin scarf, and when she saw the girl standing there, she put one hand to her chest as though her heart had given a small unexpected kick. "I'm sorry to bother you," Renee started. "My mother and we used to live here. A long time ago. I just wanted to." "Boyd," the woman said. Not a question. She said it like a word she had been holding in her mouth for years. "You're the Boyd girl. Renee. Sweet Jesus. You came." And Loretta Greaves, who had lived in 3B for 9 years and held a door open in the dark the whole time, without ever once knowing if anyone would walk through it, stepped back and let her in. Renee did not understand, not yet. She stood in a living room, laid out almost exactly the way her mother's had been. Because the rooms only allow so many arrangements, and she watched a stranger go to a shelf by the door and take down a small stack of envelopes held together with a rubber band gone brittle with age. Loretta held them a moment before she gave them over, the way you hold a thing you have been the keeper of and are not sure you have the right to release. "These came for you," Loretta said. "One every year. 9 years. October, every October, regular as anything. I almost threw the first one out. I'm glad I'm not the kind of fool that throws out a thing she doesn't understand. Here. They were always yours." Renee took the rubber band off with hands that had started, somewhere in the last 30 seconds, to shake. 9 cards. 9 envelopes, each addressed in the same hand, blocky, careful, old-fashioned, the hand of a person taught penmanship in a schoolroom with a strap on the wall. Each one to Renee Boyd, 412 West 144th Street, apartment 3B. and inside each one, the same kind of short, plain message. Never the same words twice, but always the same heart. And never a name signed to it. Someone is holding something of your mother's for you. If you are reading this, you came home. Come and ask. It is yours. A friend of your mother's. I always thought, Loretta said, watching the girl's face, I always thought it must be somebody who loved her. To do that, every year. Through the cold and all. I used to wonder, was it a man she'd cared for, your mother? Somebody who couldn't let her go. Renee looked up. Do you know who sent them? And here Loretta Greaves did the thing that turned a stack of cards into a door. One year, she said, I was sick, home from work in October, and I happened to be at the window when the mail came, and I watched the box on the corner, because by then I was watching for it, you understand. And I saw him. An old man. Gray coat. Walks slow, real slow, like his knees hurt him. He didn't put it through the slot here. He carried it to the blue box on the corner himself and dropped it in and stood there a second and then walked off east. I felt like I shouldn't, but I followed him. Just to know. He went 4 blocks and into a building over on 140th. I know the one. I know which buzzer, because I stood in that lobby like a crazy person reading the names until I found the only old man's name that fit. Carter. A. Carter. She wrote it on the back of an envelope, A. Carter, with the address. And she pressed it into Renee's hand on top of the 9 cards, and she said, You go on. Whoever he is, he's been waiting on you for 9 years and didn't know your name to find you. Go let that man stop waiting. Renee Tillman walked 4 blocks east on a cold Saturday in late October, the way an old man had walked them 9 times in 9 Octobers, and she stood in a lobby on 140th Street in front of a buzzer that said A. Carter, and she stood there for a long time. She stood perfectly still in that lobby for what must have been 2 full minutes, her thumb an inch from the button, while everything she had ever decided in the dark about being an afterthought waited to find out if it was true. Then she pressed it. The voice that came back through the old speaker was careful and slow. Yes? Who's there? Renee opened her mouth and found she had not planned a single word. My name is Renee, she said. Renee Boyd, I think you've been writing to me. There was a silence on the line, so long she thought the speaker had died, and then she heard, faint through the bad little speaker and through a closed door 3 floors up, the sound of a grown man's breath go out of him. All at once, the sound a person makes when a thing they have carried for years is finally, suddenly set down. The buzzer rang to let her in before he ever said another word. Amos Carter was 71 years old, and he met her at the top of the stairs because he could not have waited the length of the hall. He was exactly the old man Loretta had described, gray and slow and dignified, in a cardigan buttoned wrong in his hurry. And when he saw her face, he made a small sound and put his hand on the doorframe to keep himself up. Because she had her mother's chin, he would tell her later, though he had only ever seen her mother's chin in the one photograph on the green card, and he had looked at that photograph 10,000 times. He sat her down at a kitchen table that had 1 chair, his, and he brought a second from the bedroom. He made tea she did not drink because he did not seem to know what else to do with his hands. And then Amos Carter went to the front closet and took down a basket. And out of the basket he took a thing wrapped in a faded dish towel, and he unwrapped it on the table between them with the care of a man handling something that could not be replaced because it could not. And he set it down, and Renee Tillman saw her mother's handwriting for the first time in 10 years. The card was green. Deep forest green, with a single gold bird in flight on the front. Renee did not pick it up right away. She put 2 fingers on the edge of it, the way you touch something to be sure it is real and not water. And she read the front, and she opened it. And there inside, filling most of the white, was her mother's round, careful hand, the same hand as us, summer, but pages of it now, oceans of it. And at the top it said, To my Renee on your birthday. And Renee Tillman made a sound that was not crying yet. That was the sound that comes before crying, the intake, and she could not read it. Her eyes would not hold the lines. She pushed it an inch toward the old man and she said, "Please." And Amos Carter understood, and in a kitchen on 140th Street, an old letter carrier read a dead mother's last words to her living daughter, out loud slowly, "The way you deliver a thing into the right hands." Vernita had written about being 7, and about being 17, and about being 34. She had written, "You are going to be told a lot about what we don't have, and I need you to know you came from a woman who decided early that what we had was enough, and that enough is its own kind of rich. And don't you let anybody teach you to be poor in your spirit just because the rent is late." She had written, "When you are 17 you are going to think I left you with nothing, and I need you to know, I left you with everything I was. It just doesn't come in a box." She had written about a green coat she'd bought 2 sizes too big so it would still fit, and Renee, who had worn that exact coat for 3 winters without ever knowing why it had been chosen, put her face in her hands at the kitchen table, and she had written at the bottom in a hand that had begun to shake, "I am not going to be there for a lot of it, baby, and I am so sorry, and that is the only thing in my whole life I would change if God let me change one thing. Be good to the people nobody sees. That is where I'll be." When Amos finished, there was a long quiet in the kitchen, the kind of quiet that has weight to it, and then Renee asked the question that turned the whole thing over. Because she had it wrong, the way Loretta had it wrong, the way anyone would. "How did you know her?" she asked. "My mother, the card said you were her friend." And Amos Carter, who had told exactly one lie in this whole 9-year errand, told her the truth. "I never met your mother," he said, "not one time. I want you to hear that plain, because you're going to want to make me into something I'm not, and I won't have it. I was a mailman. 38 years. The autumn your mother passed, I was a year retired hut and I was walking my old route the way a fool walks where his life used to be. And the young man who had my route, he had this card in his hand, and it had nowhere to go. Your mama mailed it to your own door, and then you all were gone, and there was no forwarding, and no return that would answer. And there is only one place a letter goes when it has nowhere left to go. They send it down to Atlanta, to a warehouse, and they open it looking for a clue. And when there's no clue, they burn it. That was where this was headed. Your mother's last words to you were going to be burned in a building in Georgia, and not one soul on this earth would ever have known she wrote them." He stopped. He looked at the green card. "I couldn't let that happen," he said. "That's all. A man in my position is not allowed to keep a letter. It's the first rule there is. I broke it. I broke it on a sidewalk, and I have never been sorry. I couldn't find you. Lord knows I tried. So I figured, a child comes home someday. A child goes looking for where she came from. And if you ever did, you'd come to that address. And somebody ought to be telling that address every year that there was something here, waiting. So I sent the cards. To keep the door open. That's the whole of it. I'm nobody. I'm just the man who happened to be holding the letter." Renee was quiet a long time. Then she said, "You did this for 9 years, for a girl that you never found. Mr. Carter, why?" And that was the question that broke him. Amos Carter, who had buried a daughter in 1992, and had not cried where another living person could see it in all the 32 years since, who had grieved the way his people grieved, in silence and in motion and in showing up, sat at his kitchen table across from a 16-year-old girl with her mother's chin, and he put his face in his hands, and he wept. Not the way grief looks when it is fresh. The other way. The way it comes when a thing has been pressed down so long and so hard that the only direction left for it is out. He cried for a long time, and Renee did not try to stop him and did not fix it, because she already knew, young as she was, that you do not fix this, you only stay in the room. When he could, he told her about Della. He went back to the closet and he brought out the other card, the one with the cardinal gone, rust colored with the decades, and he laid it next to the green one. 2 undelivered letters side by side on a kitchen table. And he opened the cardinal card and showed her that it was, he said. She'd have been 41 this February. She drew birds. couldn't sit still long enough to draw anything but birds. And I had this card for her 9th birthday, and I was waiting to write in it, because I wanted it to be perfect. And you do not, child. You do not ever wait for perfect. Because she died 3 weeks before the day, and I have had this card 32 years and never been able to put one word in it. So when I saw your mama's card, with the bird on the front, going to be burned, going to die undelivered the same as mine. He could not finish. He did not need to. Renee Tillman did not go to nursing school the following fall to get away from anything. She went towards something, and the something had a shape now, and the shape was a kitchen on 140th Street, where she had learned, at 16, the only thing that her whole profession would ever really come down to. She learned it from a mailman. The job is not to fix it. The job is to show up and to make sure the last words get where they are going. She came back. That was the thing about Renee that Amos had not dared to hope for. She did not take her mother's card and her mother's words and disappear into her own life, which would have been her right, which is what most people would have done, and no one could have blamed them. She came back. She came the next Saturday and the one after. She brought her Aunt Sandra, and the 2 old strangers and the 2 women who loved Renee sat in that small kitchen and ate sweet potato pie that Sandra brought in a foil pan. And somewhere in there, Amos Carter stopped being the man who happened to be holding the letter and started being, in the only way that ever really makes a family, kin. And on a Saturday in February, on what would have been Della's 41st birthday, Renee Tillman sat next to Amos at the kitchen table with the rust-colored cardinal card open in front of them, and she put a pen in the old man's hand, and she did not say anything. She just put her hand over his the way her own mother had once held her, so her lips would not go blue, and she waited. And Amos Carter, after 32 years, wrote in his daughter's birthday card 3 words. It does not matter what they were. They were 3 words a father had been carrying for 32 years, and they got delivered finally into the only place left to deliver them, which was the paper itself, and the act of writing them, and the girl sitting beside him who made sure he was not alone in the room when he did. The green card sits framed now in an apartment in Far Rockaway over a desk where a young woman studies the names of medicines and the stages of the heart. And Renee Tillman, who is going to be very good at the work she has chosen, has already started doing a thing her instructors did not teach her and cannot grade. When she is with someone at the end, someone whose breathing has begun to change, she asks them, gently, if there is anything they need to say to somebody. And if there is, and if their hand can no longer hold a pen, she holds it for them. She writes it down. She makes sure it gets where it is going. She learned from a man who carried other people's words 11.5 miles a day for 38 years, and then carried one woman's words for 9 more, that no last thing a person says in love should ever be allowed them to go undelivered, and that the people who keep that promise are almost never the ones anybody sees. You walk past them every day. The slow old man at the blue mailbox. The woman who keeps the door open in the dark. The one who shows up and shows up and shows up for a stranger who may never come. And every now and then, after years, on a cold Saturday with nothing special about it, somebody finally comes home and knocks and finds out that all along, when no one was watching, they were never an afterthought at all. They were somebody's whole reason to keep buying the stamp. I keep getting stuck on one thing about this story. Amos broke the law. Carriers don't get to keep your mail. It's a federal trust, and people have gone to prison for less. I wrote him as a good man. I think he is one. But I'm not sure I want a world where the mailman decides which letters are worth saving. That road usually ends somewhere ugly. This time, it didn't. This time a kid got her mother's voice back. So here's what I can't settle, and I'd really like to hear you on it. When the rule is right almost every time, is the one person who breaks it a hero or just a lucky exception? I don't have the answer. I keep writing toward it.